Welcome to Bring to Front, a podcast about design work and life by the Toronto Design Directory. I'm your host, Margot Trudell, and today I'm talking with Natasha McDiarmid and Sam Johnstone, co-owners of Night Shift, a boutique design studio. We're going to talk about being designers and entrepreneurs, what it's like to work with your romantic and business partner every day, and we're going to get into what they've learned since closing their unfortunately timed shop, Troublesome, in 2023. Let's go say hi. Hi, guys. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, really excited to talk about the studio and all your different projects and everything. You guys have done so much together and independently over the last, 10 years, I think, that I've known you both.
Yeah.
I'm really interested to hear about, kind of what goes on inside your minds and how you do it all.
Totally.
You're both designers. You've both been working for, I think, 10, 15 years individually before starting your studio Night Shifts together. I'd love to hear a little bit about your kind of career progression from each of you before we get into your sort of joint work. So, Natasha, would you start and just give us kind of the background on your career from sort of school to just before you start the studio?
It's been about 16 years, so I'm going to try not to be too long-winded, but I feel like I've just done so much in that 16 years. I grew up in Niagara, so I went to school at Niagara College. I took a 2-year program, and then quickly jumped into my very first design studio. And from there, I went to my second design studio that was located in Burlington. And the interesting thing about both of these studios is because it was the Niagara region, the studios there, I feel like they tend to be a lot more smaller. They're much more boutique. So I was often one designer of maybe a team of 3 or 4. And both of those companies were run by a husband and wife team. And then worked on a lot of boutique style graphic design, traditional graphic design, because this was before, responsive web design and before product development even, and before tech really took off the way it is today. So I worked on a lot of things that was like city campaigns, worked with a lot of wineries in the Niagara region, and a lot of things that were just more print-based compared to what, Sam and I kind of work on today. And then moving forward from Burlington, I then jumped to Toronto, and then that's where I made the switch to working in advertising. And that was pretty different from the small boutique studios that I was accustomed to. The advertising agency was once again the third time run by a husband and wife. So I don't know how I kept coincidentally working at these companies that were run by these duos. But it's kind of funny looking back, because I always thought it was insane. And I was like, I don't know how you could even imagine running a company with your partner. That seems wild to me. But clearly looking back, I'm like, oh, that must have had quite an impact on me. So I worked at an advertising agency, very different, much larger teams and very different projects. So I had a good understanding from the boutique and the advertising. And then hopped from there to working in tech. And again, was a complete change once again, where tech was kind of a mesh of both of those backgrounds, where it started off really small because I was an early hire. And then I got to stay on with the team as it grew, like the advertising agency I worked at, where it grew to a much larger team. And then during my time at that tech company, I also taught part-time at Niagara College, the school that I graduated from. I taught their web team. And during all of that, I also freelanced all the time throughout my career. And I had side projects. Margot, as you know, how I met you, I believe, was from running a little Etsy brand called Fox Hut with my friend and business partner at the time, Alexia McGinty. And we did that for about 5 years. So we gained a lot of experience working with the more creative indie side of things in Toronto. And I met a lot of cool people, including yourself, from that experience. And yeah, then I started freelancing, and that's kind of right to the bookend of right before we started Night Shift. So my trajectory for my career, as you can tell from all of that, is that it's completely all over the place, and that I was not linear at all, and not follow a clean, simple path.
Yeah, that's definitely a lot of bouncing around. But it sounds like, you decided, and we can get into this a little bit later because Sam, I do want for your career background as well, but it sounds like you were always attracted to doing your own thing because you freelanced on the side a little bit, and then you started Fox Hat. Sounds like you always wanted to do something kind of on your own independently.
Yeah, it's interesting because people say that to me, and I don't know if that's necessarily what I knew that I was doing, and if that's really where it came from. I think I was so deeply insecure when I started off, and a lot of that came from like I only took a 2-year program. I didn't go to like a dedicated art school. I didn't go to university, so I felt like when I came to Toronto, especially, I felt a lot of pressure to kind of keep up with the city and the people that I was meeting that I was really impressed by. And so a lot of that might have just simply come from an insecurity, which I don't know if that's like a good thing or not, but it was definitely beneficial looking back at like how I'm able to do what I do today, because so much of my experience is from all of that freelancing and like the side project stuff that I took on.
What was the 2-year program at Niagara? What kind of stuff did you cover in that program?
Well, it was designed to be, I guess what it would be called is like to build your design portfolio. So it covered every single aspect of graphic design. So we had like a life drawing class, we had a computer class, we had a dedicated typography class, a dedicated like 2 and 3-dimensional drawing class. So you learn like the basics very lightly of each category. Then the intent is you build a strong enough portfolio that you can then use to apply to a college or university and further your education. So it was kind of like an introductory program to art and design, and then from there you should kind of leapfrog into another program. And some of my friends and peers that I went to that school with, that's exactly what they did. They then went off to Sheridan, for example, or something, but I decided not to, and then jump right into working full time.
So did you feel like after that program, like you knew enough about design to work, you didn't need to go to another program?
Absolutely not. But again, it came from like a deep insecurity of feeling like I need to get a step ahead of everyone. And my program, for example, like didn't have an internship program, which I know is like very well, at least it became more common, I think, as I met people who were graphic designers, and so many of them had all this experience through their university program where they were in a studio and kind of getting that hands-on experience. I didn't have that. So I think I just felt a lot of fear. And then also coming from Niagara, where there wasn't a lot of design studios to even consider working for. And yeah, that's
yeah. What is the design scene in Niagara like? I admit I don't really have any idea.
I grew up in Welland, so I have some acquaintances that have their own design studios, and they're incredibly talented. They've definitely focused on creating artwork for local bands or bands all over like Southern Ontario. So they do a lot of very impressive work. But aside from that, the only other studios that I'm familiar with are the ones that I worked at. So it felt like once you work at those places, it doesn't feel like there's a lot of options because the studios are so small. So you kind of feel like you're forced out, or at least that's how I felt. Like maybe other people have a different experience, but that's, I think, what kind of pushed me to wanting to live in Toronto.
Yeah. So you both moved to Toronto because you're like, I just need, more job opportunities than what's available at home.
Yeah. And then also just like culturally, what drew me to Toronto was just being around art in general and design, and just having options and outlets for me to engage in outside of my 9 to 5, outside of work. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then so Sam, tell us about your career progression up until you started night shifts.
I mean, I think I had a very fairly normal journey. That I went to art school. I moved to Toronto, coming out of high school to go to OCAD, and I've stayed working in Toronto since. So I didn't exactly venture too far afield geographically. While I was at OCAD for the graphic design program, I did a bunch of internships, and I think similar to the way Tosh felt, that I had this sort of anxiety of you just keep on getting told like how competitive it is. And I think because we were both getting our footing around the time of the financial crisis, that you're going to school and getting into the workforce at a time where you're told like everything's changing and prospects are dire.
Yeah.
So while I was in school, I was like, we didn't have a school credit program for internships, but I was just going to places being like, I just want some experience. I need something to give me some kind of leg up, whether that's just like understanding how the industry works or just understanding how different types of graphic design businesses operate. One of the internships I did was with Sputnik Design Partners, which is just a at the time it was a 3-person team. I don't know how big they are now, but it was 2 design partners and then 1 senior designer, and I was coming in as an intern, and I really liked the energy that they had. That it was something that I was just attracted to the setup of it. And then I immediately did not follow that instinct at all and started to work at a big agency that was part of the sort of WPP conglomerate. So it was an agency of 250 people within a network of hundreds of agencies. So an entirely different experience. And that was like mainlining all of the different varieties of design experience you can get. I missed my first deadline because they hadn't given me a laptop yet. It was like my first day and they'd given me a project before they had given me actually a desk to sit in.
Wow, that's classic ad industry.
Exactly. So after a couple of years of that, I needed a little bit of a breather. So I went to work in-house at a telco, which was great, super stable. The hours were a lot better. But after a couple of years of that, I was getting a little bit restless. And at that point, Tosh and I had known each other for a couple of years, and she had already been at that point working independently, just freelancing on her own for a year. And we had talked about doing something together. We talked about officially launching a studio, and so I eventually put in my notice there, and then we started Night Shift.
Yeah, I've had similar experience to you, Sam, where I've worked in advertising agencies and stuff like that, and I've seen a lot of different sides, what it's like to run a small business versus what it's like to work in like a 100-person company that's part of a 1,000-person company and that kind of thing. They're definitely different experiences, and it sounds like you figured out what you prefer through all those different working experiences that you had.
I mean, yeah, for sure. Although it's kind of funny. I know we'll get into Night Shift in a little bit more detail, but because our clients are so varied, that it feels like, I had this impression early on of, if you're working at this small company, everything's going to be a boutique. Your clients are going to be the same size as you. The types of projects are all going to sort of fit within this nice little like boutique design box. But our clients have been so varied, which has been great. But it means that when we're working with a client that has thousands of employees, you sort of get into that mindset. You adapt to their HR schemes and their project management structures and stuff. Even when you are maintaining your own internal processes, you're still sort of just like de facto a part of the big machine.
Yeah.
So even the nice thing is we get the flexibility of working with big and small companies, but it doesn't feel like I've really sort of moved all the way into the nice little boutique side of things. Some days it feels like that and it's nice, and other days you're like, oh yeah, right, this is what it was like.
Yeah. So as a small studio, you guys, when you have a bigger client, it feels more like you've joined their team more than they're just your client kind of working with your team.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the weight sort of shifts a little bit more on their side.
Yeah, well, I want to talk a lot about Night Shift, but before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about you two and your relationship, because you guys are business partners, but you're also romantic partners. You've been dating for, I'm actually not sure how long, is it 5-6 years?
It's 8 this year.
That's 2015, 2016?
2016.
And you guys met in a sort of designer kind of event, right? An outing, if you wouldn't mind telling us about that.
Yeah, we're very annoying graphic designers where it's just already in like 5 minutes. It just seems like all we do is graphic design, that we even met each other at a design event, which is kind of funny. But yeah, TWG, I believe, was the agency that was, they put on in life networking events because they wanted to step away from the typical conferences under dimly lit fluorescent lights. And so they wanted to take people out in nature and do something that was a little bit more natural, organic, a little bit more human. And so the very first event that they held was going to Paris, Ontario, and going on a raft down some sort of river. And I was fairly new to Toronto, I think. Well, like a couple of years, maybe. And I remember I was just, I was still at the point where I was eager to meet new people because I was still kind of building my social network coming from Niagara. And I was in a very like yes mindset of anytime someone asked me to do something, I was saying yes to anything. And I remember a friend at my job just casually threw me a link to this event and was like, you should do this. This sounds like it's up your alley. And I signed up, and that's where I met Sam. We were partnered in the same group on a raft. And we were, I think, the two dorky people that had non-serious design projects, because the whole point on the raft was everyone was like going around in circles and talking about what their creative project was, and everyone had these like very serious design projects. And at the time, Sam was doing a personal project called Lonely Thinkers that was all in black and white, and then I was doing Fox Hat with Lex that was all in black and white. So I think immediately we just bonded over like the silliness of like, I'm like, oh, I do wrapping paper. It Sam's like, I draw sad people, and I was like, you're my person.
And it's really because, TWG, very product oriented. So everyone there had this very like tech mindset. They were all like, there was sort of a Patagonia vest vibe to it. Not to say anything bad about it. It was great. And obviously, we got a ton out of going on that event, but, we're just showing up as sort of on the crafty,
crafty
unprofitable side of things.
Yeah.
And everyone else is there being like, this is my VC backed idea. And I'm like, this is a pencil drawing I did
on Instagram. Yeah.
It is funny though, this morning we were, going out, getting coffee, talking about, sort of getting in the mindset, getting ready to be on this podcast. And person behind the camera asked, like, what do you guys do? And I said, we're both graphic designers. He's like, oh, wow. Did you guys go to school together? I said, no. And he said, well, where'd you guys meet? And I said, on a boat. And I like that gets to be our sort of quick or elevator pitch answer for where did you guys meet? On a raft in a river.
Yeah.
Yeah, super unique. I mean, there aren't a lot of events like that for designers in general. So it's funny too, because you guys both are very like, it seems like you're both very outdoorsy people. I know you just came back from New Zealand and you have some like gorgeous photos of mountains there, and you've done a lot of backpacking trips together and stuff. Like that's a unique kind of intersection of like you're both into graphic design and like art, and then also the outdoors and like mountain climbing and stuff. Like, what are the odds that you guys would meet?
Yeah, exactly. That's why that event was, I think, so magical and a key component of our compatibility.
Yeah, that's incredible. So then you guys were dating for a couple of years when you decided to start Night Shift, is that right?
Yeah.
2 years.
Yeah, I was just kind of I was teaching at Niagara, I was working at my tech job, and then I was coming to the close of both of those things. So I jumped into freelancing because I was just kind of at a place where I was like, I need to just be on my own. I felt like I had reached my ceiling working for others, and kind of, I jumped into that and did not really plan that at all. And Sam joined me about 8 months after that.
Yeah. Waited till Tosh got all the foundations done, did all the hard work, and I was like, oh, that looks like it's going well. I should join that. So I've been riding her coattail since.
Right. And I mean, you must have had discussions about what it would be like to like be in a relationship together, to eventually live together and then work together. Like, were you concerned about spending all of your time together?
I mean, I won't speak for Sam, but like, absolutely. I think that would be dishonest to say that you wouldn't have those fears or concerns is like maybe a better word. I think even when I think back of when we had the early conversations about running the design studio, like I remember we were at Buka, we were having brunch or something there. And I think this was probably like a year or two before we started. And I remember feeling a little bit nervous to even talk to him about it, because I had always, like, I kind of had this idea at that point in my life to eventually do my own thing, but I didn't quite have the confidence yet. And then I was like, well, do I share this kind of dream with this person that I'm still getting to know? That seems like a big risk or a big leap. And, I'm sure he felt the same way. And yeah, so there's definitely was, I think, some concern.
Yeah, I think so too. I do want to say that, I mean, Tosh had the name Night Shift before we talked about it. It was an idea that was, in her head for a long time. I think the trepidation was, I didn't have as much trepidation just because I had gotten, I'm an introvert who had always worked in these big open concept spaces with so many people that the idea of spending, time with less of that sort of cacophony around me with a person that I already liked it just felt like an upgrade where I'm like, well, even if we drive each other crazy, it'll drive me less crazy than having, 20 people walking by my desk every day. But it is something that I think, we're super mindful of, and it's definitely been a factor. We moved into an office space specifically because we wanted to have some kind of breakup between like home life and work life.
I think that was more me though, which I feel bad because I think I'm the one that gets a little bit more stir crazy. And I think you are more comfortable working from home, and like this was before the pandemic. Yeah. Whereas I'm someone that really likes having like, this is where I work out, this is where I live, this is where I sleep. I don't know. I find that it made me feel like I was working 24/7 to live and work in the same place. And then also like we're in a relationship. So it feels like there's no separation between when you're just a person and you're not a business owner.
Well, the real reason that I was more reticent was just to do with the cost of, renting an office space. But after we moved in, like after we pulled the trigger and moved out of the apartment into an office space, it instantly felt better. So, it was definitely the right choice at the time.
Nice. Yeah. So when you guys went into your office, were you able to like turn on your kind of professional, now we're colleagues mode? And then when you go home, it's like, now we're in a relationship mode kind of thing?
I don't think we'll ever be able to have that idea of like, okay, we're shutting off the work thing. And from talking to other couples that own businesses together, they say the same thing, that there's such a drive in society or in culture right now where people want this, like, I work 9 to 5 and I come home and I don't think about work. And for us, I think that your life becomes more blended if you work with your partner and then now we work from home. I don't think that it would be realistic for us to think that we could shut that part of our brains off, because and I won't speak for Sam, but I've always had a little bit of that entrepreneurial brain, so it's hard for me to shut that off, and that's just like the way that I think in general. So there are perks to it because it means that we get to talk about design a lot. It's not necessarily that we're talking about the boring like day-to-day file admin or client admin stuff. It's that we're talking about things we're excited about or personal projects that we want to work on outside of the studio. So there are benefits of being able to like share that passion with someone that you are in a relationship with and live with and then run a business with.
Yeah, I think it also really depends on, the personality type. Like before we started night shift, we'd go over to each other's apartments after a regular work day, and I'd be like, what are you doing tonight? And she'd be like, oh, I'm working on freelance. I'd be like, oh, I guess I should do some work too. And so
we were always annoying.
We were always doing that anyways. So I think to some degree, us working together, the conversation we have around the dinner table is like, what'd you do today? How was work? Except we were both there for it. So it gets to be a conversation that's, part of it is you don't really get that separation. But the other part is like, well, you're just more enmeshed in those stories. So like you're sharing more about this big chunk of your life that happens to be work. And the conversation, I think, does, shift. If we're sitting on the couch, we're having a different type of conversation about, I feel like we talk about more ideas rather than, when we're sitting at our desks, when we're talking about like, did you email this person?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. So you get to like get deeper into the sort of stories from your work day and like really analyze like, oh, did you see that client email and like what's going on there, and
yeah,
or what's your idea for this project or whatever.
Yeah, you get to share in some frustrations, just like when you work somewhere and you have that like work best friend that you get to kind of share your frustrations with. It's nice that we have that with the both of us.
Yeah, that's sweet. I mean, I think in my case, my partner, we don't work together. We have very different jobs. And, I learn a little bit about his office life and what's going on with him and stuff from what he tells me. But, obviously I'm not there. I can't fully understand it. So I can't totally like commiserate with him around work frustrations and that kind of thing. And like vice versa. He's not, part of my work life. So he kind of understand, but not really. It sounds really satisfying to have somebody who like fully gets it, who knows like all the dynamics, who knows like all the kind of players and your different stories and stuff like that. And you can really support each other even like more in that way.
Totally. But it can also be like a double-edged sword, right? Because you are working together and sitting beside each other all day. That your frustration sometimes can be each other and like how your style of working. Just like when you work at a studio, at a company, and you're mad that like Stacy sent you the files and they're not named correctly or something. Like
Yeah, sometimes I'm Stacy.
like sometimes you can bicker over things that at the end of the day are so silly and not, they weren't worth the pettiness to begin with. But yeah.
Yeah, I think the one thing that we lose is that most couples don't fight about file structures.
Or care.
It sounds like it's made your relationship stronger, though, overall.
I think so. I mean, we're so enmeshed with each other's lives. I guess it depends on if you think about that as a good or a bad thing.
Yeah, definitely. And then it's nice because then you have someone that's kind of always in your corner, and they're not faking it. Like, it's sincere. Sam is the most talented designer I've ever worked with. So, yeah, it's nice to kind of share this life and then also the passion of design and also just a separate passion of running a business with someone that is incredibly talented and is, I don't know, just showing up 100% all the time.
Yeah, I mean, graphic design in general is one of those things that's, it can be a little tricky, I think, from a personality perspective, because for a lot of people, it's a job like anything else. It's a job that you can put a lot of passion into, but it doesn't ask you to, that you can get a very, traditional corporate experience of design, but you can also have one that's entirely personal, emotional, and, that you're sort of dedicating to your life to. And I think what I've always struggled with is, I feel like we've got a little community here of people who are equally as excited about just participating in this world and sort of building these cultural things together. But most of the designers that I meet aren't necessarily within that little clique, or don't have that mindset. So when you find somebody who thinks the way you do, or sort of sees, their existence the same way you see your existence, it's, I guess I feel like it's less that we started a business together as life partners, and more that I found the one person who, I want to spend so much time with her because we think along the same lines across all these bounds. And because design is such a huge part of my life, it's so refreshing that we get to share, that element too, that gigantic sort of chunk of the pie chart together.
And it goes beyond just like, I think when people hear the word design, they're thinking of, oh, you guys really like Adobe Creative Suite together and that's cute. It's like, no, it's like when you run a business together, the design of your business, the design of your life, the design of your future, and the way that you look at work, you get to have a say in that and get to control that. Whereas if you work for someone else, you don't necessarily get to do that. And yeah, I always had this angsty part of me whenever I was working for someone else. And I don't know if I could really put my finger on it or find the words to explain like what that discontent was. But it's nice to have this thing with Sam, like the studio, where it's shaping our life outside of, staring at a laptop, staring at a computer, that it's more than that. It's like, how we plan our vacation and how we have the ability to be flexible in our schedule, even though by the sounds of it, it sounds like we don't take a day off, but we do. But yeah.
That's great. So you found just like another kind of version of yourselves in each other, and you both just like really want the same things. It sounds like there's just a lot of compatibility, really.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So we talked about being like very entrepreneurial, and so you started Night Shift. What year was it that you opened the studio?
2017.
2017, right? And then you did that for a few years, and then in I imagine you thought about this in 2019, but in early 2020 you started another business together. Would you tell us about that?
Sure. So that project was called Troublesome. And the concept was, it was a cafe that would be part of our design studio. That was the original concept. I mean, it changed a lot since the early conversations that we had before it came to real life. But some background on how that idea even came to be is Sam and I were on vacation in Amsterdam, and we were at a cafe, and there was an architectural firm that was embedded underneath the cafe, and it was very tiny. Maybe had like four tables, and yeah, had a cute little architectural firm that maybe had like 4 desks, had a bike on the wall. And we were just like, oh, wow, this is so romantic. This is so cool and so hip. We would love to do that. And that was like so many years before we actually had the opportunity to start Troublesome. And so, fast forward, before we started the project Troublesome, we had office space. So we were working in our own office somewhere. Where was that? What's that neighborhood called?
No.
It
was at Lansdowne of Dupont. It was.
But what's the name? Is there a name for the neighborhood?
I don't remember.
Okay, I don't like Lansdowne neighborhood. And long story short with that is that we needed to find new office space because our lease was coming to an end. And we narrowed down our office space options to the place that we were at, which was on College, and it was storefront. And even though we didn't need a storefront because we were a design studio, that is what started the whole idea to even put this on the forefront and to kind of make this a priority. We were like, I guess that's maybe like the universe's way of telling us that now's the time. And we couldn't really imagine this opportunity coming up again. And we were like, let's just pull the trigger and go for it. And it was at the time really close to our previous apartment. So yeah, that's like the early days, the start of how that kind of came to be.
Yeah, I do want to, just hang a lantern on that we were looking at these 2 different offices, and it really was just, our lease had expired. We had to find a new office. And even though we'd had this conversation in 2016, it was this on the back burner idea. And we were kind of looking for excuses not to start the cafe because looking at other normal offices, it wasn't really on our radar. We came across it, and the, commercial real estate's all basically the same sort of bracket of pricing anyways. So we were like, it's a little bit too expensive. And we're like, well, it's actually the same price as the other place we're looking at. That's just a regular office. And so it just became one of those things where we were, I think, a little bit nervous to start something like that. But circumstance is the thing that
pushes you.
Yeah, pushed us into it, which was sort of funny given what happened the next couple months later. But
so, running a store is a whole other kind of business because you had your coffee, and then it was also a gift shop, right? So you had variety of products and everything. And that's just like, you have to build your kind of vendor relationships, and you have to get the stuff in the store. You had to design the store a little bit. It looked really cute. And then you had to learn a little bit about coffee and get an espresso machine and all that kind of thing. So why did you want to take on a second business on top of your design studio? It's just are you busy enough?
We get asked that so often, but this goes back to the earlier conversation or question you asked about having that delineation between your relationship and home, or are you the kind of person that shuts off at 5 and you're like, okay, I'm done work? We don't we just can't think out. We don't know how to stop the way our brains work, and we think very creatively. So we don't think about it in terms of it's another business. This is going to be this whole thing. I feel like we think of it like kids, hey, this would be a fun, cool project. Why don't we do it? When you're a little kid and you're hanging out with all your friends, and it's a Saturday, and you're like, let's get a tape recorder and start talking we're news reporters, and then in the afternoon you're gonna start a puppet show, and you don't think about the logistics when you're a kid. You just jump in and you're excited and you hear about this enthusiasm. I feel like we've carried that childlike excitement into adulthood, and so it could be also a negative thing because we don't think about the burden of work and how much time it takes up in our week. We just get it. We get overwhelmed with the excitement of it, and we kind of, like I said, just jump into it. And yeah, when you're excited about something, I don't think that your gut reaction is to think about the difficulties of it. I think that comes after, when you're like, oh, this is, there's this hurdle, this thing I have to learn, this thing I have to do, which we felt once the pandemic started. But yeah, how do you feel about that? You share that opinion?
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking the same thing about it. It almost feels like we're playing with toys when we first come up with the idea. Where I think we're very practical on a day-to-day basis, but the type of thing where if we're going out for a long walk or if we like are taking sort of a weekend away, some point we'll just say like, have you ever, we'll walk by a business and be like, isn't it kind of weird that they all work like this? What if there was like a this? And it's, not that all of our ideas are amazing, but it's just the kind of thing where we're always sharing these thought experiments. And it just kind of feels like you're playing with an idea. And then, in the case of Troublesome, where we happen to, stumble into a perfect like retail space. And we're like, well, I guess that play idea has to become a real idea now.
And I think that there's also an element that maybe makes us greedy where we never feel fully fulfilled creatively. Because with design, I think so many graphic designers, you get into graphic design because you love art and you grew up maybe liking skate t-shirts, or you like snowboarding, or you liked watching cartoons on the weekends. And so all that kind of influenced your love and admiration for design and graphics. And then you become an adult and you start working. And although you can definitely work on projects for clients that are incredibly fulfilling and really magical in their own right, there's a feeling when you finish a project that you work on with a client where you're just like, well, I don't own this. And, maybe that sounds a bit arrogant or like egotistic to think like that. But I think if you're a creative person, there is a little bit of you that like kind of wants to own something that is a representation of how you view the world, or represents something that you want to see in the world because you just think it's cool and you like design. And it's really as simple as that. And yeah, when you're doing stuff for other clients, you're not always getting to exercise that because it's not your vision, it's the client's vision, which it should be, and it's their brand vision. So having that opportunity to kind of carve that space out that is ownable is something that I think is important for Sam and I.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing that prevents us from thinking of, well, the hourly commitment you just signed up for, or how many days a week you'll have to be in the office or at the shop. Which I'll say, I mean, at the end of the day, we've reflected on it since we closed down the cafe that I thought at the beginning that we would get burned out from being at the shop. And, there were plenty of times where back when everyone had to go into an office every single day, that you'd start to like get bored of a certain part of your commute, like a certain street corner or something, or you'd start to resent a certain type of like the elevators or something like that, all these little points of friction just sort of build up over time in your mind. And I was worried that would happen for our own business, that if by introducing this routine where you got to open at this time every day and you got to be open this many days a week and you got to do these tasks every day. But, at the end of our experience, like none of that sort of resistance, none of those calluses built up in my brain, which I was kind of surprised by, that it wasn't necessarily the extra hours or the extra commitment. It was like the only part of that ended up being sort of this pain point in my mind was just the scheduling, that, if we had booked off a day to go to the city, we'd still have to be on call in case, one of our staff who was covering the shop had an issue. And, you have to be really, it becomes the same kind of question when you introduce any type of big responsibility where, it's like, oh, I want to go away this week. I get this opportunity to go away this week. Oh crap, what am I going to do with my dog? And the shop became our dog, where we'd go and take care of it and love it. And, you never resent it because it's like your thing that you love, but you still have to deal with the consequence of like, well, how am I going to schedule my life around this now?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really great analogy. But it sounds like the shop, more than just a business and then like a responsibility, it sounds kind of almost like an art project in a way. It's just something that you were being creative about and excited about, and you just always wanted to be like dabbling a little bit in figuring out parts of it and stuff like that.
Yeah, and that we actually did frame it as a project even when we launched it, because I think maybe that also comes from a fear or insecurity that we didn't like the idea of calling it a second business, even though it obviously was, because using the term project took a lot of the weight or the expectation off of us, where it allowed us to work on something that could fail without feeling bad about it. And like, again, with my background working on Fox Hat, like there were so many similarities to then opening Troublesome, where I felt like fairly confident with, sourcing the products that we had in the shop. and just being on the other side of, instead of making the goods, I was sourcing the goods. I knew how to curate because, just again, working in being in that craft market side of the city and meeting all the different vendors and people who make things, you kind of you develop an eye for what, consumers are looking for and what you get excited about. And you already are familiar with those brands because you've either met those people or they were at one of a kind. And so, yeah, it felt like a very easy kind of level up from what I had been doing with Foxhead.
Nice. Yeah. So then you guys, you found the space, and just to be clear, you guys had an office in the back for night shift for your design studio, and then the front was the store, right?
Yeah, actually, so that's, I think, part of the reason that it didn't feel like we were taking on so much, because, to take a step all the way back, we were looking for new office space. We found this retail location that was ground level, had street access on a popular thoroughfare, and our original idea was we would have this tiny little, this tiny little space at the front that would just make use of the fact that we had a retail window. So it would be about, less than 100 square feet, and it would just be a coffee bar with like a little merch shelf. And then we put up a partition and use the rest of it as like a client lounge and an office. But, we moved in, I think we sort of alluded to this, but didn't say it concretely, but we moved in February 2020. The world shut down, a month and a half later. And, we weren't able to finish the construction, build all the pieces that we needed in that, 1 month that we were there. So we were really just there with a blank canvas. And we had, that whole year where in an empty room, we couldn't really do anything with or move into. Everything was sort of in this stasis. It was nice that we got to, a place outside of the house that we could think about when, for the most part, everyone could only sort of think within the bounds of their own, dwelling. So we had this space that we could think about. And, as that time went on, as we stayed in lockdown, the idea just sort of grew naturally, where we were like, well, I mean, we don't need, that much space for just the 4 designers that, at our studio. So the idea just grew in terms of the amount of, physical square footage we wanted to give to this little like retail component.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're like, well, if we're, giving 400 square feet to the shop, we got to put something in it. So all of a sudden we had to think about all the different, types of products that we need to have. And so I think one of the things that prevented it from feeling like this big, scary new business was, in our minds, it was still just this like little add-on that happened to be at the front of our office, where in reality, the shop was 75% of the space. And it's the thing you look in the window where people would come in, walk all the way through and say, oh, you guys have some desks back there, which is, very different than how we were sort of conceptualizing it originally.
Mm-hmm.
So this shop became, and selling products and gifts and stuff became more of just a bigger part of the business initially, because you wanted just a small thing, and then it suddenly grew into something much bigger.
Yeah, and then we were trying to think of, before we knew how long we would be in the space, we thought it would have been a great ecosystem because we work in brand for clients to work with us. We develop their brands, and if they have, if their business model is like direct to consumer and they have a product and packaging that they're selling, then we would have a place for that to live. Of course, they would live in many other places, but kind of having that ecosystem where you work with us, we help you with your brand strategy, we help you with your identity, we develop the packaging, and then it, poof, it like gets to live on a shelf like immediately, is kind of a cool indie concept for a small boutique design studio. So yeah, there was a lot of benefits that we were thinking of that would play into how it would benefit the design studio. So it wasn't this like completely separate entity, that it would kind of, they'd both feed each other.
When people would say like, oh, night shift, what do you guys do? We'd be able to sort of just gesture broadly and be like, this.
All of this, everything. Yeah, that's very cool that you get to like then sell the products that you just did at Identity and Packaging and Forza Up in your own store. It must have felt very much like you're in your own kind of world, like your work feeds back into the shop, like the physical space that you're in, and you're always surrounded by kind of what you do, and then you two go home and you talk about it some more, so you're just like always in this kind of headspace of night shift and troublesome and stuff. And that must have felt kind of, I would imagine, kind of satisfying in a way. It's just like all your stuff all the time and all things you care about and everything. And you just like curated this space that's like kind of perfect for you both.
Our perfect self-centered universe.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's parts of that. And then I think sometimes, the people weren't fully, we had really great feedback from most people that came in the shop, which we're very grateful and thankful for. But I think some people were like not fully understanding what we were doing. And so, yeah, there was some challenges. And, I think we still had a vision of what we wanted Troublesome to be. And I don't know if it ever fully reached that potential because of the hurdles that we had with the pandemic. Not to like, lean on that too much, but it definitely added some elements that I think prohibited us from turning it into like the full vision.
Yeah. I think, that idea of it being this perfect sort of closed loop was something that was on our minds. Not that we ever wanted to be like entirely self-centered in that way, because, there's so much cool stuff in the world. And I think, a big part of the draw of having all these other products was being able to bring the stuff that we were excited about outside of ourselves, into our lives in some way.
Yeah.
But, we were excited about having products we designed on our own shelves, not just, ones that are out there in the world somewhere, but somewhere we could see customers interacting with them. But it only ever represented a small percentage of the products we had on the floor. And people would come in and say like, ask us about the business, ask us about ourselves. And we'd say we were designers, and they say, did you design it here? And we point like, well, we did that, and we did that, and we did that. And then they'd pick up something like, I don't know, like a Hario pour over and be like, did you do this? And we'd be like, well, we didn't do that one. And so it always ended up being this sort of strange things where people would come in either with too big expectations of us or too small expectations. We had a lot of customers who were grateful who came in and were like, we think what you guys are doing is cool. And a lot of other people who were just, they, I don't know, pick up the table and be like, did you guys design this? And be like, well, we didn't design that table.
Not that kind of design.
Like I feel like always a little bit of mixed, like we never nailed the elevator pitch of this is the exact story of, of this concept. It was just a project we were excited about where we got to pour our hearts into and explore different areas of design without having to be worried about clients. But I think absent that idea of like, and we designed every product. Instead, we were like, we designed, a handful of the products. That wasn't a strong enough message.
Mm.
I still feel like I've got a little bit of baggage where people would come in, and it was always that, like we, designed so much of the interior, but we had some off-the-shelf parts or some off-the-shelf furniture, and then some that we designed but had fabricated by somebody else, and some stuff that I made with my own two hands.
Well,
And people would always, I feel like, come in with these questions that felt very like pointed, where like it almost felt like they had done research and were coming in just to like, I don't know, just that they were very incisive, where they would point at one thing on the floor and be like, what's that about? And I'd be like, well, that one's actually just from IKEA. You could have pointed to anything else that wasn't from IKEA. You could have pointed right behind me that I made custom for this space, but you had to point to the one thing that was like off the shelf from the most boring possible supplier.
right. Yeah, it sounds like people had an idea that this is like a design store means everything is designed. It's like almost a art gallery or something.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely feel like a lot of people had that impression or idea or confusion.
Which would have also, been totally cool. But we were, I think one of the things that became a recurring conversation for us, especially at the time that we had launched it, where, there's a lot of, I think, like social upheaval and conversation. And I think when it comes to design, a big part of that is, accessible design, affordable design. And so we tried very hard to make sure that there was a balance of things that were approachable. We weren't coming in and saying like, look at all these, fabulous luxury goods that don't make sense for their function or for this community or whatever. So I think the reason that I pinpoint or pick on the customers who came in and were like needling us about either being like, but not being ritzy enough, was because it's like, well, that was an active part of our conversation. It was like, how do we do something that feels like it is, embracing a larger portion of this community and not doing something that's just exclusively, handmade $700 spoons or whatever.
Yeah, I think for the part of the frustration, and I find this a little bit too, what I do is that design is too broad a term sometimes.
Yeah.
Especially for people again who work outside of the design industry. I mean, you've got graphic design and interior design and editorial design and architecture, and so the design is that for one. And then for our purposes, for what we all do, we narrow it down to graphic design, and even that is quite broad because again, there's packaging, there's branding, there's web design, there's so much stuff within that. And so for kind of a layman to come in and be like, this is a design boutique, gift shop, coffee bar, what have you, they're thinking whatever their familiarity is with design, which might be completely different from what we actually do and what you guys actually do. And then you just gotta every time have to explain, okay, so this is the realm of design that we sit in, and that's what this means, and and it's hard to kind of explain to somebody who's just not in it.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you guys opened. Well, you opened the shop in February 2020, and then you leased the space in February 2020, right? I think you announced it, but it wasn't open yet.
Like a year later.
Right. Yeah. So then you had like an empty space for it was a whole year before you were able to actually open.
Yeah. Yeah, we couldn't open until the following June.
Oh wow. So more than a year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pretty long.
Yeah. That must have been stressful. You were paying rent on that space that you couldn't really use for that long, right?
Yeah, I think I blacked out most of 2020 and 2021 and 2022 and probably 2023. Because, yeah, when we think about it, it kind of makes us feel nauseous. But, like, in some ways, it was nice because Sam and I had a space to work. Our staff worked from home, but we just lived across the street. So we were able to kind of create that place to go where we could feel like the world wasn't completely falling apart. So, I don't know. I don't know if it was worth the amount that we were paying for that. Probably not, but that's how we reason with it in our minds to kind of make peace with it. But yeah, it was definitely challenging emotionally and financially.
Yeah, you must have wondered at some points, is it worth it to keep paying this? Or because we didn't know back in 2020 when things would open up and when we could do stuff.
Yeah, and we had we signed a 3-year lease. So it's kind of like, what are you going to do? I guess, yeah, I think we just kind of accepted it and didn't really try to even argue about it in our minds, because I think it would have just been too upsetting for us to be like, well, if only we knew like a month before, like that would have completely changed everything. So
I feel like we adapted pretty slowly to the sort of the new normal mindset, because we had, only just a couple years earlier, we had been working from home, driving each other crazy, and it was this big victory to move out of the apartment into our own space, where it felt like our business wasn't just two freelancers working from home, but it felt like we had a real studio that had real presence. So us slowly moving year after year from a co-working space into our own office and then into this new thing that was going to be this big exciting idea, it was really hard for us to let go of that idea. So I don't think it really crossed our minds,
Yeah, continue.
Well, especially not in the first couple months, because, as you said, we had no idea when things were going to reopen. So maybe if we had known you're going to be in and out of lockdown for the next 18 months, probably would have reconsidered. But, every month was a new month, and we were like, well, maybe next month we'll get to open up.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was the thing. I remember that time too. You just had to kind of play it by ear. I felt similarly where right before COVID, I had been planning the entire 2020 year. I had been booking venues for events, for Toronto Design Directory events, and I was just at the beginning of that planning, and then everything shut down in March, as you remember, and it was like, well, do I keep the date for like June or for September or whatever? Like, will it be fine by then? I don't know. And it was that was my frustration with COVID, I think, was just like the inability to plan and to look even a few months in the future, because it was such a question mark as to what would be happening in the world. I think that's what really killed me about the whole beginning. And I imagine you guys felt it so much more acutely, because then you had thousands of dollars coming out of your bank account every month with that question.
Yeah. And then I think we developed, or I did anyway, an insecurity about the project entirely, where when we first launched it, I don't even feel like we launched it again in a way that we would have if the pandemic wasn't going on. Like, I think we purposely were a little bit passive about it, because we were like, we don't want to make too big of a deal about this launch in case in 2 weeks we have to like close it again and then reopen it. So we were like, we'll just treat it like a soft launch. So then we never really had like a formal, proper launch that we would have if the pandemic wasn't going on, where we would have like had a little party and made a bigger deal about it. I think, I harbored some insecurities, and then also just peers and people that just couldn't comprehend like why there was just a lot of social conversation around people that were opening businesses in the pandemic, and like, why would you do that? And going back to what we've been saying, which is like, you just didn't know how long it was going to be. And so you kind of tried to have hope, thinking like, okay, maybe in a couple months, this will clear up and then things will be back to business like usual. So it was kind of hard to know what was the correct decision to make. And then even looking back, I don't think we would have changed anything, because we just didn't know. Like, now, because you've had 3 years to reflect, and it's like, well, it's a lot easier in hindsight to be like, well, that you shouldn't have done that, or at the timing, but it's impossible to know.
And I think that there's also a big element of cultural shift too, that, when we were moving into the space, thinking back with rose-colored glasses to, the old days of, the 2010s were all this hustle culture, that if you didn't have 9 businesses, what were you doing? You had to have you only have single-digit businesses. It's not enough. What are you doing with your free time? So it didn't feel crazy for us to be doing something, new on top of our existing business. And, just in that first year, or rather over the course of the last, now coming up on 4 years, we've just seen people become a lot more conscious of, what is good ambition and what's bad ambition, what's, toxic workplace behavior, positive workplace behavior, what's too much and what's too little work. And it's just something that I feel like we were, we've always been excited about our projects, and it's obviously different when it is a thing that you can own for yourself, because you can sort of cling on to that, like all your excitement for it. I actually don't know where I was going with that, but just I guess the idea that it's something that I think stayed on our radar even when it didn't make sense to open up a business, just because it's something that we'd spent like a decade sort of in that mindset of just like, we'll launch this new cool fun thing. It'll be this another sort of little dot on the map of the Toronto design scene, which felt at the time like it was thriving, that all the stuff that you were doing, all the stuff that all of our peers were doing, where every, couple months there was a new cool event, there's a new cool, art show, market, something. So we just want to be part of that fabric. And then that fabric kind of,
decayed.
Well, yeah, I think it's coming back now. I can see it coming back now, but it just kind of feel like, or it kind of felt at the time like, we had this like quilt that was the Toronto design community, and then it got pulled off the table. And we're like, oh, wait a second. And we were just left standing there with a business being like, does anyone want this to exist anymore?
Oh, you're right. COVID has changed so many things, and excuse me, you're right. Like, I did feel, I see it the same way that you do, that throughout the 2010s, we had a great community, lots of different events, shops, shows, all that kind of thing. And then you're right, with COVID, it just kind of all disintegrated. It fell apart because we couldn't get together, literally. And I think it's really interesting that you point out the kind of mindset shift between the 2010s and now the 2020s, where, in the 2010s, it was very much about like hustle culture, hustle hard, have all your side businesses plus your 9 to 5, all that kind of thing. And now with COVID, and especially I think with remote work, and we've started kind of culturally talking a lot more about work-life balance and about burnout and all that kind of thing. And the pendulum has really swung in the opposite direction of like, no, you shouldn't have like 6 different businesses and side projects and stuff like that. It should be enough to work one like 9 to 5 or run one business or whatever. That's just sustain you, and then you deserve time in the evenings or weekends, whatever, to relax and recharge and stuff. And I think it is a little bit ironic now that you guys sort of pointed out that you opened up a store / workspace, because you had that office in the back right before everybody started switching to work from home. Like, you really were kind of at the tail end of that, like working in an office is normal, and then you open up an office, and then suddenly working from home becomes the norm.
Yeah, and we've talked about that so many times. I feel like that is one of many examples throughout both of our careers where I feel like we were just like always late to the party. Like, I don't know, we're not good at picking up trends, or we just pick them up too late. But I mean, some of that is just like coincidence. Like, how could you have predicted what was going to happen? So
It's true. I mean, it's something we talked about at the time. I don't think it's even just too late. I think it's just wrong time, because sometimes we're too early.
yeah,
Like, I felt this weird insecurity when, I mean, that sort of window of time really rocked, I think, both of our confidence. Tosh mentioned us not doing sort of a big launch because I think we had this self-consciousness about, like, does this matter? Does anyone care? Is this something that people...
there's a lot more important things going on in culture that are worth talking about. And we felt like you're kind of like taking up space talking about your second business. Like, it just felt a little bit gross, and made us feel a little bit insecure.
But at the same time, the idea of like having a little party to launch your business, like, that's not tone deaf. That's just a normal thing that happens. And I feel like we just got so sucked into the big conversations that we lost track of, our little personal conversations. I mean, like Tosh and I between each other.
Mm-hmm.
There's something else I was going to say, but I forgot that too. About the timing. That was also, a lot of people took the opportunity to be, to reevaluate their work situations. So we had so many friends who quit their jobs and started to do something else. And this was, we'd been running night shift at that time for, I think, 2.5 years. And we felt like we were like, should we be doing something new? It's like, well, we're trying to do something new and we can't do it because we're blocked. So it just felt like these moments where, as soon as like we move into a new office, the same moment everyone else moves out of the office, we double down on our existing ventures as soon as everyone else is like, it's time for radical change. So it just felt like we were, too soon on some trends, too late on others.
Mm-hmm.
Just always a little bit out of sync.
Yeah. But I mean, it wasn't even really that trends were ending, right? It was like world-changing events that, again, nobody could have predicted. And you were paying attention. You were still listening and paying attention to the world and being very conscious about, like, is this the right choice for us right now? Is this the right thing to do? Is this going to make us happy? And it sounds like ultimately, once Troublesome was able to run more normally in 2021, it was a really satisfying project for you guys.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I look back and, you could be stressed out about the finances of, paying for that rent when we couldn't have the space. But I don't even think about that when I look back at it. I focus on the idea that I think that was almost the perfect timing, which sounds ridiculous based on what we just talked about, but perfect in terms of where we were in our lives. Like, I won't speak for Sam, but for me, like, I can't really imagine being in a mental space to do that now, because I wouldn't have the confidence based on where the economy is today and where like the downtown core in Toronto, even the neighborhood we were in. It's like, with everyone working from home, I don't think things have really picked up entirely in terms of foot traffic, and the cost of living increases. People are just not spending their money the same way as they were before the pandemic. And those changes obviously impact small business. So I wouldn't have the confidence today to do the same thing that I did before the last 4 years. So I think that was kind of like the 11th hour for us to get in right before the door closed, to kind of get that off of our chest of being able at the end of our lives to say, hey, remember that time we had that cute cafe? Like, we did that thing we dreamed of. And even if it didn't last like a decade, we still did it. And in our eyes, it was still a success. And that's still something that I think that we're both proud of and happy that we could have been a part of the community that we were in.
Yeah, and it's true. If we hadn't done it at the time, I don't know if we'd have the confidence to do something similar in the future. Whereas now, because I do have all these extremely positive memories that I wouldn't have without it. Who knows if we would just be we're gonna keep the business lean. We're gonna keep focused on the task ahead, and not think about doing the next version of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely right too about, I've seen so many different businesses similar to Troublesome close in the last couple of years because everything is more expensive in Toronto now and people aren't spending their money the same way. You're right. And I'm not in that world, but I can't imagine how difficult it is to run a boutique business like that on College or Queen Street or Roncesvalles or whatever now. And so you guys did decide to close Troublesome in late summer 2023 or fall 2023, I believe. What were the decisions or what was the conversation that led to that decision?
Well, we had only a 3-year lease, so our lease was coming to a close anyway in the month of February. And right before that, our design studio kind of took a hit in terms of client work, because that year, and we spoke to so many people who are peers and friends who work in tech, and a lot of people, like, there was a lot of layoffs in tech, and a lot of people just weren't getting work. And then that impacted our client base, because we have a lot of clients that are in tech, or people, again, going back to like just the increase of like inflation, cost of living, that the small businesses that we had were kind of tightening their wallets on how much they were spending in marketing. And so that impacted our design studio. And then that made it hard and difficult to consider re-signing another lease for 3 years or 5 years, with the future being so unsteady. And we wanted to be a little bit more like pay more attention to the trends that we just witnessed over the past 3 years, where we were trying to be hopeful and trying to just be like, next year it'll be better, next year it'll be better. And I think we just had so many signs that were showing us that maybe now is not the time to do this thing, or now is the time to kind of simplify your business and lean it out and focus on just kind of maintenance instead of growth. I think, Sam and I were very fortunate with the studio that every year we were on an upwards trajectory. Like, in terms of workload, we couldn't keep up with the amount of work that we had. And we were very thankful and lucky that we were able to hire designers that wanted to work alongside us. And yeah, 2023 was just an incredibly, I think, the most challenging year for Sam and I, both like personally and professionally. And so that all weighed into the decision of, do we want to sign our names, like our signatures on a contract again? And, it was just pretty easy to make that decision at that point. Emotionally, it was hard, of course, but, we knew what the next 6 months were going to look like for us personally and professionally. And we just knew that having that extra overhead, like not just financially, like the burden of like the mental weight that was taking up for us, we just weren't at a place anymore where we could really, I don't think it was like a healthy, good thing to have. Do you agree?
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like looking back, year after year, like in 2021, things started to get a little bit better. 2022, things started to get a little bit better.
Yeah.
And then 2023,
it just nosedived.
Things stopped getting better. And that optimism that we had moved in with, which is, well, surely we'll get back to some semblance of normalcy, whatever that looks like. I know the world's going to be different, but, there's going to be a future here that's better than the present that we're living today. That was very easy to say, mid 2020. And then mid 2023, you're like, well, we'll keep on having other problems, and they've sort of continued to mount. And I mean, as Tosh was saying, we had this this diverse set of clients, and we had Troublesome, we had clients in the tech sector, in hospitality. It just felt like
events.
It just felt like every area where we had placed our, chips on the roulette table,
planted our seeds, yeah,
happened to be the ones that would get hit the most when, interest rates started to go up, lending rates started to change. That, all of the tech clients, they started to have to, winnow their staff, reduce the number of projects they were working on. Same thing with like hospitality, dealing with, we're no longer opening this new hotel because we can't afford.
We have to reduce our staff. We have to reduce the amount of people we can have in our hotel. So that means we're not making the same income. So that means we can't pay you as much, and blah, 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 blah. So yeah, there's a lot of competing reasons and things. But yeah, I think ultimately it just kind of came down to the timing of what was going on in the world. And then, yeah, in our personal lives as well.
And given that we had, started it under these, big macroeconomic, looming effects, when 2023 rolled around, and it was, there's a new set of them. It's a brand new class of different things to be stressed out about. We were like, okay, well, I can see that, this is going to be an ongoing battle. So, that became the the main part of that
I
conversation.
kept in touch. I talked to people who owned other small businesses, and everyone was sharing the same concerns and fears. So it's not like we were alone in that. And so that gave us the confidence to make that decision of that people who had run a brick and mortar for years before Sam and I were kind of making the same decision and agreeing that it just was not adding up and not making sense financially anymore. And so that helped, I think, also contribute to like us having the confidence to make that decision.
So once you decided that you're not going to sign a new lease and you're not going to continue to run the store, was that a bit of a relief?
Yeah, in some ways. Yeah, I guess. I mean, there was a lot of disappointment. I mean, there were so many emotions. You're just grieving this dream that you had that you actually were able to bring to life, but then it kind of had such a short shelf life, like in my perspective anyway. It didn't get the season that I wanted it to. So yeah, a little bit of disappointment there, but relief in the sense of now we can channel our focus on night shift and get that back to a healthy an area, and then focus on other areas of our life that needed attention.
Yeah, to echo what we had sort of talked about earlier, our business, like the conceptual foundation of our business was built on this now sort of outmoded idea that we would have this ambitious, not necessarily that we are like the hustle bros, but that we were still in that mindset of just like all getting excited about side projects and getting excited about all the different, projects you can do, sort of that maximalist approach to work, and being dedicated to having a physical office space. It was an outmoded concept of how to run a design studio. So I think the relief was being able to say like, okay, let's get rid of the baggage. Let's sort of go back and like focus on the foundations and say, well, like, how do we adapt in the way that everyone else has been adapting for the last 3 years? And that was a refreshing part of it. It was, very sad for us to leave that space. Although I admit that, we've been resistant to working from home. We've been so happy to have an office space. I feel like I've adapted because the world has. Now that the world is ready for everyone to talk remotely, it's definitely made things easier than the first time we worked from home, which was, when you'd have to apologize to clients for having a video call instead of going on site. Now it just feels like, it's very different than I thought it would be in a positive way.
So you like working from home now?
I don't know if I like it as much as having an office space, but it definitely doesn't feel as sort of, I don't know, it doesn't carry the same day-to-day stress that it did the first time we were working from home.
Yeah, I definitely don't prefer it. I definitely benefit from having a separate space mentally. I think it's better for my like mental health, my mental stability. Just getting outside and having that like fresh air and walk. And I know you can do that even though you work from home, but I think being forced to walk to a place and be in a different mindset is helpful for me anyway.
Yeah. I thought we'd lose our commute and like, our days are going to become so much more efficient because we don't have this half-hour long commute, bookending each part of our day. And now before we sit down at our computers, we walk outside and do the exact same distance walk just to clear our minds and get sorted for the day. So that's sort of the ritual that both makes it possible to work from home and also completely negates the benefit of it.
That's true. So now it's been about 6 months out since you closed Troublesome, and clearly you have a lot of thoughts on that process. And you're just working on night shift, right? You're just focusing on that for the moment?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We took the opportunity to, go back to the core business, which I mean, always was the case. I think something that a big part of running Troublesome was negotiating time between the two. That we originally had, part-time staff that was just working at the shop, just working at the cafe, so that we could, it didn't feel like we were taking time away from our clients, whether that was for their perception of us or our perception of us. But by the end of it, we've gotten to a good rhythm where it was just us running the shop, mm-hmm. and we would just be taking, a couple minutes out of every day every however many minutes it would take to make coffee, have a short conversation with someone. no, I lost my train of thought again.
Yeah, you're doing that a lot.
I am.
I mean, now you can just focus on your client work. You don't have to like serve customers, or again, like you said, deal with your staff members and the scheduling and all that kind of thing. And your weekends are free.
Exactly.
That has truly been the biggest thing. Is since 2020 we haven't really had weekends, and so it's nice to experience those again.
So, do you think you would start another project similar to Troublesome in terms of just the time commitment, the financial commitment and stuff, or are you kind of satisfied right now just having like the one job?
Sam and I still talk about the next project all the time, and we said we weren't going to do that, and we have to stop ourselves because we've definitely like said, okay, we want to in the future, but we need to chill on even talking about it because we need to give ourselves time to kind of just recover from the last 3 or 4 years. But it's just like going back to what we were saying at the beginning of this conversation, like we just are creative people that like dreaming about ideas and projects. So yeah, I think we would definitely start another project in the future. I don't think it will be anytime soon. I think we definitely need that space and time to, like I said, recover a bit. But I don't think it would be the same. And again, I won't speak for Sam, but I definitely don't think it would be the same business model. I definitely feel like I've exhausted that. I know that that's not ideal for us or for me, for like a long-term commitment. It was great for like a small project, but I think the next thing that we do, I'd want to level up a bit. I think looking back at my trajectory, like doing Fox Hat was a great like stepping stone for me to work on Troublesome, and then for Troublesome for the next step after that to be something that's a little bit bigger, that's kind of like a self-isolated project, and maybe like I will actually call a business rather than a project. But we're kind of maybe like keeping that quiet for now, but we've talked about some projects and ideas that we're thinking about. But again, these are just seeds that we're planting now and might not come to life for another like 5 years. So
Yeah, if we're smart, then you won't hear any new projects from us for the next couple of years. So.
yeah.
Yeah, it's still something, I thought, I was worried that it would sort of be the type of thing where we close it down and we're like, oh, we can never do that again. And, pretty quickly we were coming up with not ideas of like, this will be the new Troublesome, but ideas of just, this would be another cool thing that we could think about doing down the road. And maybe if we run into a similar situation where we happen to accidentally run into, a great space or great opportunity that sort of forces our hand, then we'll be in the same position we were in 2019.
Yeah. We just really like conceptual business ideas
Yeah.
where maybe if you are in the creative space, you might walk by and like scratch your head and be like, what is this? But I know that when we travel, like you said at the beginning, like we were in New Zealand, and every time we walked by a place that had like really cool branding and scratchy type, I like stopped and was like, what is this place? And even if it was weird, I was like, I love seeing other people do that. I get so excited by it. So I think that that's kind of like our niche.
I mean, I really admire that you guys had you're attracted to those ideas, because I also am, and you had this dream of like this store, coffee shop, whatever, and then you actually make it happen. Because I think a lot of people have those same kind of fantasies about opening a cafe and whatever, and but actually doing it is it's a whole other task. And you guys actually made, like, it sounds cheesy, but you actually like made your own dreams come true in that way. I really admire that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, with a ton of work, but well worth it.
Yeah, it's the type of experience that, we've had, a couple people say that they wanted to do something similar to that, and which was so obviously nice to hear. And I'm very happy to say at the end of it that like I would still urge people to do it, maybe with the asterisk of, be really mindful of the economic conditions you're walking into and, costs and everything else. But, from just a blanket emotional perspective, just it's something I'm really thankful that we did pull the trigger on.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like something that you can look back on in like 20 or 30 years and say like, wow, remember we did that? That was really cool.
Yeah, definitely.
That's awesome. Well, I'm really looking forward to seeing whatever your next project is in the next couple of years. I do hope you take a bit of a break. You guys definitely deserve it.
Yeah.
But I can't wait to see what you do, and we'll keep talking about that too. You've got to keep me in the loop on that stuff, and
Yeah,
I'll
definitely.
support whatever it is. If you get to have a launch party for that next project, I'll absolutely be there.
That's awesome. Definitely.
Well, thanks so much for chatting with me today and sharing this story. I think, again, it's something that a lot of people have thought about for themselves and kind of wonder about the realities of doing it. And you guys have actually done it. So thank you again for sharing that and giving us so much kind of background and inside information. This was a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Bye.